Going to stop sharing. And cool. Well, thank you again for joining us. I'm not sure if I did your intro justice, so I'll give you maybe a couple of minutes to quickly introduce yourself and tell us everything about you.
All right. So, hi, Shuchi. Again, thanks for the invitation. 17,000 members. That is awesome. Certainly thrilled to be here. Certainly thrilled also to be able to share whatever knowledge it is that I have. I don't think it's a lot. So hopefully I won't mislead anyone here today. And I'm glad you clarified that I was not the reason why you left finance.
Yeah, I'm totally kidding.
So, but anyway, but no, I think what you said is a good summary of my background. The only other thing that I would add is I'm originally from Jamaica, came to the States for school, had expected to go back, but as fate has it sometimes, went in a different direction. We have been in the United States for a couple of decades now. I won't say how many, but a few decades now. And in addition to that, primarily lived on the East Coast. And about 7 years ago, we relocated here to the Bay Area. And so thrilled to be here, thrilled to participate in a lot of innovation and the environment that is here, which in a lot of ways, fosters a lot of these startups, which is where we'll really focus on today, and nurturing and helping startups to get to that next level, whatever that next level is. So thank you. Appreciate the invite from you and from the organization.
All right, thank you. So just to keep it focused, I know finance can be broad, even for startups. There's like funding, there's so many other things. And then even within funding, there's like seed, Series A, all the way to, could be many. So for today's conversation, we've tried to focus it from seed to, I would say, Series A stage. So more towards like early stage. What do you think are a few things that startups should keep in mind as they're setting up from a finance standpoint? And why do you think it's important to keep finance in mind from day one?
Yeah, so there's a lot in that to sort of unpack, but maybe let's start off first of all with, and look, I think everybody already knows this, so much of what I'm going to say is should be no surprise, but maybe let's start off with, first of all, why do investors give, capital over to, to founders and to entrepreneurs and that sort of thing. And at the initial stage for an investor, it is really about investing in people and investing in ideas. And so at that sort of that initial contact point with potential investors, and again, whether that's seed, whether that's an angel, or even at a VC stage, a lot of times the idea isn't necessarily fleshed out at that point in time. And so what they're really focused on is I'm going to invest in this individual, I'm going to invest in this idea with the expectation that this idea and these individuals can actually create something that is meaningful, and that in that creation, there's ultimately a return on their investment. Make no bones about it, investors are in the business for making a return, and investors are, presumably doing their best to sow enough seed capital that then allows them to, have that return.
Cool. And what are the things that founders should keep in mind, and everyone, please, because we want to make it conversational, feel free to chime in at any point with any questions that you might have for Mark. But what are some of the questions when investors, as founders, are trying to raise money? What are some of the things that a founder should expect an investor is going to ask when they're investing in a company
Yeah.
from a funding standpoint?
Right. So, I'd start off by saying, first of all, that look, at the end of the day, even with the best of ideas, even with the best of intentions, even with the best of team, there's not a whole lot that one can do without cash, right? That cash is ultimately going to be the lifeblood. And that cash is important. And, I sort of think about it in, really three buckets, right? That cash is going to be used to invest in, people and operations, right? And the people and operations are the ones that are going to drive the ideas. Um, that cash is going to be invested in what we'd call investing activities, right? So property and equipment, depending on the business model. But that physical infrastructure, if you will, that ultimately helps that business to grow and to scale and to perform. And then more cash hopefully begets more cash. And so how do you think of further on in the company's life cycle around financing activities, and whether that's in the form of debt or in the form of equity? But if you were to put on your investor's hat, what is it that an investor is thinking about before making an actual investment, right? It's uh, why do you need the cash, right? What are the specific things around how the cash is going to be invested? In sort of your early stage when you're still fleshing out the idea, right? It is all about, again, depending on the business model, depending on the type of business, and maybe this conversation will lean more towards technology, just since that's a big part of my background. But it's really around what is it that's necessary to get to a minimum viable product? What is it that's necessary to get to a um, a product, if you will, that customers are willing to buy, a product that customers are willing to pay for, right? And again, product and or service, somewhat interchangeable. So investors want to know at a granular level um, where the cash is going to go, how is it going to spend, what is the burn going to be, what are the components of that burn, right? How do you get to um, um, a level where you've got what's called product market fit? Because without product market fit, then there's likely not a lot after that. And so again, sort of putting on your investor's hat, right? If you're still in that development stage where it's a product, you've got an idea, but no product or no solution, right? You're likely going to be investing a lot on the people side and on R&D, right? And, in terms of getting all of that fleshed out. Truth is, it's somewhat of a stab in the dark, right? In terms of, how many people, how much effort and so on. But one has to go into that conversation again, whether it's with angels, whether it's or even if you're at the Series A stage, having some knowledge, some understanding of the direction that you want to go. Obviously, that direction changes as you start having, let's say, paid trials or demos and what have you, and you start getting feedback from prospective customers on whether the product works, whether the solution works or doesn't work, and that then informs for where the product development may go. Um, in the early stages, right, as you're sort of working on fleshing out a product, getting that minimum viable product, determining that product market fit, you may or may not be investing in sales and marketing at that point in time. But I think good founders also know that at that point in time, they're going to start making some investments in developing content that builds awareness, either around the solution or around the service or around need, right? And to start generating interest and demand way ahead of having an actual product or service, that's out there and that's, sustainable. So let me pause there, Shuchi. I don't know if there are any questions or if any of the things that I mentioned you wanted to drill into specifically.
Yeah. If there are any questions, feel free, folks, to chime in. But one of the questions that I had is I have worked with a few founders, and there's this mindset that finance is not important. It's like, we'll get to it when we get to it. And that's the least of our priorities right now. There's so much that we need to do. And then investors come in, and then there's this requirement of financial statements, reporting. Like, when does a founder make this a priority? And when do you start, I don't know, getting your first accountant or your first finance person? And how do you build? What are the elements of like building the team? And what are the key roles? And how should one think about the key roles in finance as they're growing their organization? Oh, are you on mute, Mark? Because we can't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, sorry about that. Microphone was off. So look, one of the things that I would say is that, founder or the founding team should have, some sense of where they want to go. Where do they want to take the company? Where do they want to take the technology? Where do they want to take the solution? Where do they want to take the service? And, in the early days, if you think about as you go through your product development and even before you get to product market fit, there's probably not a lot of cash coming in, right? You're spending, right? And not only you're spending, you likely, have a day job, and this is, maybe part-time, or you're putting all your efforts into this venture, along with all the co-founders. And so at sort of that early stage, it's really about, I think, two things. It's really burn and spend. What are you spending? Where are you spending that money? And then, frankly, what's the objective in the spend? Are there milestones that you're working on that the spend helps you to attain? I think an investor is going to want to understand where's the money going, and then ultimately, where does the money actually get a product, gets a solution? Where does it actually take the company? The other thing that I would say is that as a founder, and even on the investor side, there are likely going to be some KPIs that you're measuring, right? And in sort of measuring those KPIs, that then gets back to your question, which is, when do you actually start? So I think you actually start from day one in making that investment in finance and accounting. But the question is, what level of investment are you going to be making, as well as who is actually doing the quote unquote finance and accounting? And look, I know that we use finance and accounting somewhat interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the way to, in my mind, right, it's neither right nor wrong. This is just the world according to Mark. The way I would sort of think about it is that from a finance standpoint, I think about the road ahead. I think about what are the things that we need to do in order to move the organization forward, and how do you measure those things? How do you set those goals that enable the organization to move forward? And here are the financial and non-financial related KPIs, analytics that need to be achieved that shows that you're actually moving forward. The way I think about accounting, again, not right or wrong, is accounting is saying what happened in the business and why did it happen, right? So accounting is really focused on measuring and reporting on what we did in the past. And so that could be your burn analysis as an example. Whereas on the finance side, your budgets and your forecasts are really forward looking because you haven't achieved those things. But your budgets and your forecasts are informed by what did I actually do in the past, which is sort of your accounting. More specific to your question, Shuchi, when should that focus begin on finance and accounting? Again, I think it starts on day one. but there is a cutoff point, right, where as you start receiving more and more, financing from, external investors, right, whether new or existing investors, um, there has to be so one, usually by the time you get to a Series A or Series B, there is likely a requirement for investor rights, right, to get audited financial statements or review financial statements. There's usually some requirement for, even if they're not minimum number of board meetings, but for a number of big board meetings to happen where investors and board members are going to want to hear the story of what happened and what do you expect to happen. So I'd say that, whatever that, jump off point is where you've raised a certain amount of financing, that at that point you're likely, um, having finance and accounting professionals involved. Now, the real question is that part-time, is that full-time, is that outsourced, is that insourced? And I think that's really going to depend a lot on the nature of the business, the complexity of the business, the expected size of the business, how much cash, have you raised? But more fundamentally, uh, and so like you, I'm somewhat biased because I we've probably spent more time doing cleanup, and way too much time doing cleanup as opposed to trying to look forward on forecasting and building the business forward. So headlights instead of taillights. Um,
Mhm.
but I'd say the sooner that you can start, the sooner that you can engage in building out your finance infrastructure, not just on the people side, right, but building out your processes, building out your controls, having a robust budget and forecasting system, having agreement and alignment with the management team and with the board and with the investors on what are you actually measuring? Like, what are those KPIs? What are those analytics that need to be provided? What are those milestones as a company that you're going to be measured on? And therefore, finance and accounting working with CEO, with the founders to drive the business in that direction. So let me pause again there, and I don't know if there are any questions and or anything there, Shuchi, that you want to dive into deeper.
Yeah. Any questions, folks? Okay.
All right.
Well
So
then, yep, go ahead.
yeah. So the other thing I would say is so two other points, right, regarding the. So you talked about the when, and I suspect that your next question is going to be, sort of the size of the finance organization, and it sort of depends, right? So I'm going back to complexity. I'm going back to size of the company, stage of the company. Um, but there is also, I think this, and again, just from personal experience, that as the company matures and as the company grows in size and complexity, you're starting to look for and ensure that you have the right subject matter experts in the organization early on. As for anyone who works with a startup, has worked with a startup, I think we all know that we're wearing multiple hats at the same time, right?
Mhm.
Shoot, back in 2014, 15, 16 at one of our startup companies. Um, we were doing HR, we were doing legal, we were doing sales operations, we were doing accounting, we were doing finance, we we're doing all of those things, right? So jack of all trades and, master of none. But as the company matures, you need those subject matter experts to, making sure that the company is getting, what is best, right? So, it's hard to work on equity and
Mhm.
option planning and so on, and at the same time pivot into a sales ops role or a business ops role. So it's crucial that in the early days, while finance may have its hands in a whole lot of different things, that as you mature, right, you've got true subject matter experts taking on those roles. Um, And the other thing is I would talk about, I guess, what I call modern finance and accounting. I guess I had um, my path to this role in the roles in the last few years, was not sort of the traditional path. I started off with KPMG, one of the big four accounting firms, started in the audit practice, then shifted over into the mergers and acquisition practice. And then from there, went into industry and worked for a few companies doing, outright mergers and acquisition. And in that role, I was able to, in some case, participate in our corporate venture capital, um, uh, program where we took stakes in startups. Was a board observer. But more importantly, as we did, all these acquisitions, right, most of which were startups, you had an opportunity to see how startups really worked, right? Oftentimes when you're working for a big company, you're not able to really dive deep to see everything that is going on. And so, it gave me an opportunity to see how startups were scrappy, how startups actually got things done, how startups were really forward thinking. And so once I got into, this sort of role, what was pretty obvious to me is that only focusing on accounting is not important. That modern finance and accounting teams have to think more strategically, right? It's really about where the company is going, and it is really about how finance and accounting professionals can arm and provide the rest of the organization with the data and with the information that it needs to make the right decision, make their decision, in a timely manner, and continuously support the evolution of the company and where it is going. So it's not just about paying the bills. It's not just about Expensify. It's not just about just sort of daily and monthly and quarterly activities that finance and accounting professionals are known for. Is not just about closing the books. I have yet to meet a CEO who has said, okay, how we close the books, I'm glad the books are closed. No, that's not what they care about. So the mindset I think that finance and accounting professionals have to have is similar to how is the board thinking? How are investors thinking? And how is the CEO and the co-founders thinking about the business, and to be able to support that while at the same time doing the regular day job.
Great. Thank you. Any questions, anyone?
Hi, I don't really have a question because, Mark really is covering everything. But I mean, for anybody else on the call, I just wanted to say that, Lindy and I are involved in our second company now, and I've done a few prior to this. And I think one of the real struggles for startups is, finding somebody to come in at risk to cover the finance element of the team, let's say, is always a challenge because by nature, accountants are risk takers. So, so this time round, we really made a sensible decision and said, look, we are going to get the financial model right. And we're not going to allow it to dictate the growth of the business, but we're going to use it as a tool to monitor the things that we're doing. And I think it's really, it's so critical that startups do bring somebody in at an early stage to help with that part, because by nature we're creatives. That's what we do. We're creatives. And as you said earlier, it's not something that most founders think about until they really have to. And at that point, you're bringing in investors who will then, with their spreadsheets, dictate the growth of your company. And I think for you to take control of it yourself as well, and that growth element, you've got to prove that you understand the numbers. So I'm just saying to anybody else on this call, it really is important to bring in somebody that understands the numbers in the beginning. And but yeah, I'm really enjoying the conversation, Mark. So don't think that there's no questions. You're answering them all.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
Yeah, no. Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
The thing that I would add to, Kay, is that the truth of the matter is, any finance professional worth their salt, including CEOs as well as including heads of sales, right, will tell you that the first budget, the first forecast, even the second and the third one, they're always wrong.
Yeah.
And until you have a proper cadence and understanding of your spend and of your revenue, and frankly, really and truly understand the business, you will always get it wrong. But you're right; it is an important guide. It is important to use that forecast. So so obviously, and there's the budget that you create initially, right? And it's got all these nice, happy plans about what you're going to do, and so on and so forth. And then reality hits, right? And so this is where the forecast comes into place, right? And the forecast, to the extent that you can provide that update among all the other things that are getting done, and use that forecast to really pinpoint where are you today, because obviously things are going to change between the time of the budget and where you are today. But to use that forecast, and if you're self-funded, maybe doesn't matter as much, but you're using that forecast to really help to shape, okay, what are the decisions that I need to make now based on what I now know? Do I need to step on the gas, spend more because, hey, the opportunity is there, the opportunity is much larger than we thought, or vice versa? Do I need to spend over here instead of over here? Or do I need to pull back? Do I need to retrench? Do I need to rethink my strategy? So totally agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I just want to add it and then kind of drill down on this topic further where, so I think forecast, and please feel free to chime in, Mark. Also, there's several functions, right? For instance, it's good for entrepreneurs ourselves to kind of give ourselves something to work towards. Then I think, and I'll let you answer this question, what as startups and founders are starting to value their company, like set a valuation for their company, I think, what role do you think numbers play in that, past, present, or future? Because that's one of the, I feel, key components of, well, first of all, what is valuation? Why does a founder care about valuation when they're raising money? And then what role do you think numbers play in coming up with that valuation for a company? So two parts.
Yeah. So, I think the classic answer, it depends, right? It depends on if you're able to negotiate from a position of power and strength or not. And, I'll use Shark Tank if anybody ever watches Shark Tank. And it's always amazing when, an inventor comes in and they've got a fantastic idea and the market opportunity is huge. You see the reaction from the sharks, right? They're all falling over themselves, jumping over one another, trying to cut side deals and what have you. And, they'll meet the valuation, for the most part, versus those where maybe it's a great idea. It's not a great market opportunity, but it's okay. And, the inventor entrepreneur comes in and they says, hey, I want to raise, X for, X percentage of the company. And you see the different reactions that you get, right? Where big market opportunity, they've got a killer product, they've got patent protection, and so on and so forth. Well, real life, all of that is real life too, I think is similar, right? The old adage about demand and supply really driving these things, I think is true. Valuation is an art, not a science, I think, as everyone knows. And again, a lot depends on, there are going to be some key factors. Do you have a track record, right? Are you solving a really big problem or not? Do you have a moat around your product, your solution? And, is it, defensible, right? And ultimately, are you solving a real problem? Or are you a solution or are you a solution in search of a problem? So I think all of those factors from sort of the art part works. Investors are smart enough, and by that, what I mean is, you're at a series A, B, C, or what have you. They're smart enough to do the market analysis, and they're smart enough to do their due diligence around the market and the market opportunity. They're smart enough to, figure out who the subject matter experts are to get smart really fast on that particular industry. And in so doing, are able to come to, some idea of valuation. Look, the truth of the matter is that in the early days of a startup, A, B, what have you, the forecast, the budget, like we talked about, it's a guess, right? You likely will not, meet those expectations, and I think investors know that. So the truth is that evaluation isn't really based on the budget or the forecast that you're putting together. It's really based on the people, their track record. It's based on the idea. How big is that idea? Again, we talked about the IP around that and the potential protection that you already have around that IP. Those are the things that ultimately are going to drive value. If I switch gears and I think about a public company, it's pretty straightforward, right? Valuation is not as uncertain because you've got public data, public market, you've got liquidity in that stock, if you will. You've got demand and supply, you've got buyers and you've got sellers. And so that is more objective than a startup, which is illiquid, which is highly risky. And so therefore, even if you apply valuation techniques, again, it is more of an art than it is science.
Cool.
Hopefully I answered both parts of the question, but if I haven't, let me know.
Yes.
Sure.
No, you have. I know, any folks have, do you guys have any questions on the valuation part? Things to think about? Or we can move on.
Hopefully we have to sleep yet.
What? No, it's a great conversation. Thank you. So back to the forecast and budget part. Who do you think drives this? Who drives the whole process? Who should you include? Like if I'm a founder and I'm trying to come up, what does the next year or 5 years look like for you? Who are the key stakeholders in the process as I'm building that plan? Mm-hmm. And what are the things that I should think about?
So I think one of the, in all the startups that I've worked for, or been around, the head of sales, the VP of sales, guy by the name of Ron Longo. This was at VeloCloud Networks where Shuchi and I both work, and back in 2017, VeloCloud was acquired by VMware. Probably one of the more versatile guys that I've ever met, right? He is engineer by trade. He has worked as an engineer. He has worked as a co-founder. He has worked as a CEO, and all of those things. And so, kind of a Renaissance type guy who knows and understands, all the different hats, and including as as an investor. And what I found interesting was that when we engaged, right, not only was he able to wear all those hats, but to really understand each of the different perspectives. And, we would, get into the meetings with our CEO, from time to time. And in those early days, right, it's really all about the sales and the revenue and the forecast, right? And by early days, I'm assuming that at this point, you've got product market fit. You've got a product that's either has already launched or it's about to launch. And so now you need to figure out how are you going to create demand? How are you going to drive demand? And then ultimately, how are you going to sell this product, right? Or sell this solution, right? And hopefully you're not selling vaporware, but that's what it's all about. So, your head of sales, your CEO, co-founder, and head of finance are going to be key in really developing, that budget and that forecast. But it ultimately starts, I think, with the CEO on, determining what the strategic imperatives are, because those strategic imperatives ultimately then are going to translate into meaningful and measurable, activities. So long and short of it is, finance, sales, CEO need to be at the table. Now, ultimately, finance owns the model, drives the model, and so on. But finance shouldn't be doing this in a vacuum. Finance shouldn't just be making up its own numbers about what it thinks it can get done, right? You need that validation from sales saying that, hey, we're going to hit, $100 million in sales or 10 million or whatever the number is. But then finance is going to push back and say, tell me, how are you going to do this, right? Is this an inside sales model? Is this field sales? How is this going to be done? How many sales folks? What is the ramp time? And then what is the delivery? How is the implementation? Again, depending on the business model, all of those things, right? So part of finance's job is to really understand the business model, and working with the CEO, working with the sales, translate that into meaningful financial terms that enable you to figure out what the quotas are going to be, how quotas then translate into sales translates into revenue, and the entire support mechanism that you need for that. So from HR to R&D and engineers and architects and solutions engineers and field sales and so on and so forth.
Cool. And then there's another thing that we used to do. Remember, the real versus actual versus like forecast or budget. How important do you think as a practice it is for founders to kind of revisit and do that comparison? And what do you think is a good, what would investors forgive and not forgive when you're if you're way off than what you forecasted or what you reported from a budget forecast standpoint? Like,
so look, my sense is that any investor of a startup company, any investor worth their salt, would have seen enough budgets, enough forecast from companies to be able to, handicap where they think things are going to come out. And, if they're paying attention, right, and paying attention to the metrics that are important to the business, they will know, right? So, one of the things that, I can remember in the past is their investor who would ask for, I want to see your new logos for the month or for the quarter. And not only do I want to see your logos, but I want to see your paying customers, right? Not just logos from trials. And what they're actually looking at is how many logos did you have the last time? How many did you have now? Now, obviously, that's in an enterprise type business, a B2B type business. Or they may say, right, if it's B2C, right, and you've got somewhat of a SaaS model, they want to look at that churn, right? Are you showing negative churn or positive churn or what have you? And so, and the idea there is that there shouldn't be any surprise. Now, I haven't answered your question yet, but the other thing that I would say is that if there is bad news, if there's negative news, don't wait. Get it out there. Talk to your investors. Talk to your board. Let them know what's going on. That continuous measuring should be going on all the time. So I mentioned earlier on that I didn't, sort of follow the traditional, path. At this stage, focused on startups and recently, public companies. But what I would say is this. Your sales guys have this, moniker, right? ABC, always be closing. Well, I think for finance professionals, it should be the same thing too. Always be closing. not waiting until the end of the month to close the books, but on an everyday basis, having your KPIs, your dashboard, your metrics that are out there that you're measuring, that you can see on a day-to-day basis exactly what is happening and what's going on in the business. And the reason why you're measuring and looking at each of those is, frankly, because at the beginning of the month, the beginning of the quarter, the beginning of the period, or what have you, you provided some guidance on where you think things were headed. And so you should be measuring against that every single day. I'll use the example of my current company where, every day we can tell, how many units we shipped. Therefore, we can see how are we doing versus, our budget or our forecast, our shipment. So, are we 90% of the way, 80% of the way, 70% of the way? So long and short of it, Shuchi, is that that constant measuring should be going on every single day. And I'll make a plug for business intelligence folks, for sales ops folks, and for biz ops folks, and say that the sooner you can lay the pipes for that kind of infrastructure, do it and tweak accordingly. I know founders and maybe even the board at times will not want to make that investment. But if you've got a seat at the table, whether you're a finance professional or you're a co-founder or you have that level of influence, lay the pipes, lay them early, build that infrastructure, tweak that infrastructure, because 2, 3, 4 years down the road, it is going to be easier to build up on that foundation than it is to start anew, particularly when you've got historical data that is just messy. And to be able to trend that is just going to be totally difficult. So,
great advice. Yes. Well, we have one more topic that I'd love to cover, but I want to make sure there are no questions. Any questions, anyone, on what we've covered so far? All right then. Cap table. What is a cap table, and why should I, as a founder, care about it? And how do I maintain it? What are some of the things that I should think about as I bring people in to the company?
Yeah. So the way I think about the cap table is it's a summary of the ownership of the company. And so at any point in time, it allows you to tell who owns what, right? Your cap table may have founder common stock. It may have various series of preferred stock. It will have, if you've got employees and you provide options to employees, that will be there. You may have vendor relationship, financing relationships that call for warrants to be issued. So all of those things will be there and laid out. It's not just important for founders, it's also important for investors. Your initial investors and then subsequent investors will all want to understand the rights, privileges, and preferences associated with each share class. And part of that is, everybody wants some sort of protection as they invest. They want protection from if there's a down round, wanting to protect their ownership percentage. And so, it's not unlike, I want to say it's not unlike having a large family where, everybody has a bit of ownership in the company. And how do you know at any one point in time who's got what? Who's really in control? And so if you want to know who's really in control, the cap table is going to tell you that. Not only is it going to tell you who's in control, but and not just from a percentage ownership standpoint, but also from a rights and a privilege standpoint. Who can actually do what? Who can actually block um, certain types of transactions, whose vote or backing is actually needed in order to effect certain types of transactions. So um, the the other sort of indication that I would provide on the cap table is keep it clean, make sure that legal is included as you provide options to employees. Um, and then that's a whole other topic. But as you make grants, make sure that that record keeping is is in place. Make sure there's somebody knowledgeable that's maintaining and managing the cap table. So look, I won't make a plug for any of the software that's out there, but there's a whole bunch that are out there. Um, and sort of the other thing is that it's my sense is, and from my experience is, legal, HR, and finance are the ones who should be deep in the understanding of the cap table. At some future period in time, whether it's a financing or there's a liquidation event, whether it's an IPO or an M&A exit or something to that effect, it is very painful if order isn't maintained. It's very painful if you don't have your ducks in a row. You don't know who's been issued what, when it's been issued, how much they've been issued, at what strike price, and so on and so forth. But as a co-founder or as a founder, whether they outsource that administration, the founder should at all points in time know exactly what's going on with the cap table, who's got what, what's my percentage ownership on preferred, what's my percentage ownership on common, what's my percentage ownership on, options and warrants and the like.
All right. There's one question that came in. I know you don't want to name any products, but do you recommend any that you've used? Are there any good products that are, I'm sure one other question would be, that are not expensive for founders to use?
So here's my take on, so look, I think a lot of times in life you get what you pay for. And that's not to say that the more money you pay for something, the better value you're going to get. I would say, like anything else, do your due diligence. There are lots of platforms that are out there. Quick Google search will get you there. But more importantly, talk to your friends, your colleagues, what have you. What are they doing? What are they using and why? What are the pitfalls of this, versus that? One of the things that we did all the time at Vela Cloud was we would have these, spreadsheet side-by-side comparisons, Google Sheet, right? Where, whether it's a vendor you're evaluating for a particular service or what, and, you put up your Google Sheet and you do your side-by-side analysis, the good, the bad, the ugly. And so, that's part of the framework for, making that decision on why this one versus that one, or none. Look, the other option as well, right, is that some law firms will do that work for you. I have been at one startup where the law firm did the work. I've been at other companies where it was maintained internally. I've been at companies where, while the company leveraged the external software, there are companies out there that provide outsource stock administration. And so rather than having to hire a stock plan administrator or an equity plan administrator, they actually do the work. So a natural extension of the organization. And for startups, I kind of like that model. Again, depending on where you are in that life cycle. But again, I wouldn't make any recommendation. I don't want to be held accountable for anybody's decision on, I went with that, Mark told me to use that. It was awful. But a quick Google search should bring back, from tiny to, the ginormous in terms of plans that, platforms that can be utilized.
Awesome. Kay sends a smiley face. So Michelle, there is a question from Michelle, which is there any advice you can give in regards to startups doing business internationally? Legal, taxation advice. I know you've set up many entities globally, right, Mark? And like presence in different parts of the world from a growth standpoint. Any things that people should keep in mind or?
So Michelle, thanks for the question, but I think we would need a little bit more context on what and why and where, because those would drive, sort of different decisions and outcomes. I think what I've experienced in the past is anything from a full-blown company creation with employees and so on. So, a subsidiary to that's on one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum using, like an international PEO where they actually do the hiring of the employee and that employee is in a foreign country doing the work. So for example, sales or sales engineer or what have you. So I think we'd want to know a little bit more about international, because that could mean anything. Some countries make it easy, some countries make it difficult. Is this for R&D purposes? Is this for sales? Is this for manufacturing? So without some more context, it's sort of difficult to answer the question. But Michelle, I think you can go off mute and ask the question. I don't think Gucci will charge you for hearing your voice.
Michelle, floor is yours.
Thanks, Mark. I was actually thinking about sales specifically, but we are looking into working with like some SDR and marketing out of like perhaps India, but also like selling products internationally. Does it get, is it become so expensive to do like the legal work and the taxation that it doesn't, that it's not a good idea when you're a small startup?
Right. Yeah, you're right. With limited funds and limited resources, you want to make sure you can get the best bang for your buck. I remember one organization in particular where I worked where before we established the international footprint, we found a partner and drove sales through that partner. And then all it required between ourselves and the partner was a contract, right? And that contract set out the terms for, commissions essentially, right? But they were our man on the ground, so to speak. They were trained just the same way. They attended the sales conferences, right? They dialed into the Monday morning calls, pipeline calls, and so on and so forth. And that might be a less expensive way of doing the legal entity, all the reporting that comes with it. The challenge though with that sort of model is how much control do you really have, right? And so relationships are important. But my sense is that there are companies out there that are specifically in the business of doing that. I can't speak to how that works in India. I'm sure that there are others who have a whole lot more experience than I do on India and on the sales side. I think Shuchi, the experience you and I had with India was more around R&D as well as the sort of back office support, if you will, from a G&A standpoint. But I've got to give Michelle that there are tons of companies out there that are ready, willing, and able to do that sort of relationship depending on the product and the technology.
And Michelle, I'm happy to have a conversation offline and help you with this as you're thinking through it. Awesome. Great. Well, we're at the top of the hour. Unless anyone else has any other burning questions?
I wanted to thank Mark and Suchi for a really informative session. And I believe this is the last in the Entrepreneur Series, except for a panel that we're going to do to close out the series. The panel was scheduled for next week, but Suchi and I think probably we want to push it out by a week because I think everyone's going to be fairly distracted with the election. So watch for that. And of course,
yes,
find information that we've been collecting vis-a-vis all these events are showing up in blog material on women in big data. And thanks again to Mark for today and Suchi for all of her hard, brilliant work in making this event come together.
No, thank you for all your support. And
Thank you.
again, thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate your time and
To
great
share.
advice.
Okay, well, with that,
All
I'm
right.
going to out by telling everybody to vote and to have
Yes.
vote, and have a great Halloween. Thank you.
Yeah.
For everyone.
Take care, all. Take care. Bye-bye.